So what we have now is we have one part where you have hammered in all the indentions so that we create this, like a jaw with teeth.
Yes.
And now we have this that's softer material. The other one.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is.
And that's
extremely soft, really.
Yeah. Okay. So it's super mild steel or almost iron.
Yep.
And of course this we have layers too because it has been folded the usual way.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you join them? How do you make them fit to each other?
I'm not telling any secrets.
Oh, I thought that was what the video was about. Exactly that.
Well, it took me a day to think about it. There's only one way. You can use the one that you forge first, like the one that you do as regular as you can. Incidentally, with a tool, with not only one chisel, but I made one with like 8, I think, 8 bills. So you get like 8 of them,
makes sense.
and then the next and so on.
Yeah.
And you have to go like 3-4 times over it, and then you can correct it with the chisel
out a little bit.
Yeah, but basically this tool is to deep mark it, and then I have a separate chisel to kind of deepen it a little bit.
Okay,
and,
then comes the fine tuning.
Exactly. Then I can play a bit so it looks good, and then the next part I use this super soft iron, and I use a really super soft iron of it's some kind of old iron from the 14th century, which is really it's virtually no carbon, quite a lot of slag, and it was clear that there's no way to hammer it so it fits. So you have to use the original part here as a matrix to hammer the other part in, right? Because only then you will get this perfect fit.
So you don't even use your original tool to just make small indentions
I tried at first, and it turned out that it doesn't fit in like, it fits like in 70% of the length.
Okay, so it makes it actually more complicated.
It makes it worse because then you end up at some point, you get like 8 teeth, all right, and the next tooth is just like 2 hitting each other, and then it's completely doesn't work at all. So the trick is now, like, you can only hammer it in hot, because it is so sharp and deep impressions on it. You can't just hammer it cold.
Okay, so what we now see, we don't actually see real points, but it's like that's why I call it a wavy line.
Yeah.
So, but the before they were connected, it was
quite pointy. Yes.
Okay.
Pointy with like rounded points. But through the process which we go into now, the whole thing stretches all the time a little bit. So in the beginning they were like this a little bit higher than you can see them now here,
and also narrower,
more per centimeter.
Okay.
It's in all these patterns. If you create a pattern and you intend to weld it together, you have to make a compressed version of it, because the welding it will both widen it and it will also stretch it.
Got it.
So you have to calculate that. That took actually most time to find out how high and how close do we need to make the teeth, so they have the same length and depth and general appearance as the original ones. Now we have this problem. This guy probably just needed to make a cool wave pattern.
Exactly.
We need to make one that he already
replicate
did.
something, which makes it, of course, more difficult.
For him, it was no.
Didn't matter if there are like 10 teeth more or less. Doesn't
exactly. Just this.
Yes.
So now is the question: how do you heat it and put it into the already made teeth without destroying them?
Exactly.
And there is no way that you have. Well, we end up having a piece that's about. Well, if you want to make this length of a tooth pattern, you make something that's about, say, this long, so plus a bit for
4/5, roughly
something. Yeah.
3/4, 4/5.
Yeah. Well, less anyway, but you cannot compress it really much, because then it will be just sort of a vague wave pattern. Something like this you need to do, and there's no way that you heat such a long piece and then hammer it in one go completely into a given pattern. It's just technically impossible. Again, it would be possible if we had the hydraulic press or something like that. So you have to do it bit by bit, and you do it like 5 centimeter bitwise, because this is about the amount that you comfortably can heat, and you can also hammer it then, because you have only a very, very small time window to hammer it. You heat the one that is not patterned yet. You put it on the teeth, and as soon as you start hammering it into the teeth, it gets contact with the cold metal, which sucks the heat out of the
Yeah.
and then it hardens immediately, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about like a few seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So hammer it in. If you continue hammering when it is too cold, it will simply not move anymore, and then you might destroy the whole thing.
Because you put additional stress that is
It
not
can only take so much.
unnecessary. Yeah.
Remember, we have now also, we're talking about like 6 millimeter to start with, then probably 5 millimeter teeth or 4.5. So there's only 1 millimeter material that holds the whole thing together. It's not really much. So
Okay, so the beginning, of course, is hardest. Yeah. Once half of it is connected, becomes more convenient.
yes, you would think that, but actually it's the other way around. Well, it goes like this. You start with it. This means you have one pattern and one unpatterned. So you heat that one.
So one
You take it
plain
out.
rod and one tooth rod.
Exactly. So you have the teeth now, and I put it then when it's hot. I put it together with the tongue. Hold it. Put
With
it
a
on
pair
the,
of pliers.
Yeah, pair of pliers is a tongue.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Oh,
You can use
well,
pliers if
learn
you
something.
like.
Yeah. Okay.
And then you put it in the anvil, and then you hammer. Well, all this goes swift and quick, all the whole thing. So, and then you hammer the hot material into the matrix. In. Look, hopefully, you get it all the way in one go. If not, you can just heat it again. Put it then next time carefully where it's been before, and hammer it in. So that's the first part.
So
now-
heating again means just taking it off.
Yeah, exactly.
and-
I think this happened here actually in the beginning that we just tried, and it's really hard to do it in one go because you really want it hammered down all the way, because the more gaps you have, the harder it is to fire weld in the end, and also it will it's some material missing, so you will change the appearance of the teeth, which is very important. Well, anyway, so you take it out, cool that bar that's supposed to be cold again because it heats up in the process, and don't want to get it over 600 degrees. So you
That's
cool
the
that.
teeth one.
Yeah, the tooth part you cool then, put it there again.
The
Teeth,
toothed one.
yeah, or the toothed one.
The tooth.
The toothed.
The toothed one.
Yeah, the toothed. Then you heat the other part again for the next try. Put it right nicely on top. Hold it and hammer it in. Now it's in. So now what?
Oh yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
Now
How
you
do you,
exactly. Now you have to make the next one.
Yeah.
Right? So now you can take it apart again, heat it, put it on top, try to hold it there, hammer it
in
in.
exactly the right. Yeah.
Really difficult. It does not really work that way.
So that means like you have this process goes on like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 6 times, half a dozen times or so.
Something 3-4 times. It depends. Yeah. So and it really always turned
So
out.
the longer it becomes, the more teeth you have to make fit to
Fit
each
in,
other, and then you have like a second to
Yeah, and
make,
you also have to clamp them firmly so they
clamp
don't
them,
move.
yeah, so it doesn't move.
And then hit them. And for this time of hitting, you have only a few seconds. It turned out it's virtually impossible. Maybe some ancient master with the right, I don't know, frame of mind can do it. I can't. This turned out to be very good for short blades, like this length you can do. Like twice you can do it. Just take it out, in again, and then it works. But any longer ones, and if we talk about these success we've been talking about, which Westphal described, the long angle,
the sax knives,
sax knives, the really long ones. There we're talking about like 45 centimeters.
and they have
the same pattern,
same
exactly the
pattern.
same pattern there. It must be some different way of doing it. And I solved the problem by doing the first one as described, and I have the first 5-6 teeth now fitting, and then I just welded it here, cheated. I just electro welded it here because it's the easiest way just to hold the two together. You could also use an iron clamp, or you could just put some wire around, or you can just always hold it with a tongue there, anything like that.
So they're fixed.
They're fixed now here, so just these teeth has to stay together. And then I fixed also the other part with the iron, some kind of a piece of iron that I just kind of hammered around it. So it has to stay together, especially that they are always like on top of each other, like they must not move to the side, which they always do when you hammer. And now it's possible to put them upside down. The unpatterned part you put into the fire, in
The one that you want to heat up.
exactly, in a really good and hot fire, and so you heat it from underneath, and then you cool a little bit the top, just with a wet cloth. You just kind of wipe a little bit over it, so you keep it just under the magic 650 something, where it is actually not glowing and cannot be worked. And since there is not really good contact between the two parts, you can actually heat the one in the fire while the other one stays cold enough.
Okay.
It is, when I found out, it was so obvious that I couldn't believe that it took me so long time to find out. But it's like, normally you always try to heat everything evenly, and once you think reverse, like it's actually hard to heat it evenly, so why not use that part? And then it's relatively easy. You take it out, hammer it in, clamp it then again there, where it's then hammered in so it can't move. Heat the next.
So the clamp keeps moving.
Well, you take an additional clamp because
of course.
You don't want to get it out there. It's also, you have to consider that iron, when it's hot, it is of course expanded.
Yes.
So when it cools,
shrinks.
it goes back. And if you hammer in the teeth, and they're hammered in, and one side is hot, and you let them get apart while they cool, already the shrinking of them shortens the whole rod so much that they don't really fit anymore. It's not much, but it's enough to cause problems. So while they're cooling, they need to be in position, and then the iron cannot, the steel or the rod, whatever we call it, it cannot actually move anywhere. So it has to stand there and puts a lot of stress to it, but it has no other choice than just cooling in position.
I see.
Es ist Schweißen in Zwangsposition.
Ah, okay.
So it is really, really complicated.
German is a great language.
Yeah. Why do we speak English? So this little line here, which doesn't look much, and what's the name of the dude with this book here?
Dr. Stefan Mäder.
Dr. Stefan Mäder, yeah. He writes that, of course, that this wave pattern here is much easier to make than all these complicated twists. And
the opposite is true.
That is only because he never made this here. I would gladly make 5 meters of twists instead of 20 centimeters of teeth, really, of the old kind. Right? So I have improved my techniques now. I have some modern approach to it, which changes the pattern ever so slightly. I can make now completely perfect 2 meter long if you want, it's no problem. But they are never the same appearance. They are better. But better is not always like better. Because you can see in the original they're very regular with small mistakes, which they did in the original, in the first
So
matrix.
that means making this pattern is a mark of expertise or a mark of quality of the workpiece?
Yes, and also some kind of anal orientation. I mean, it's really horrible to make. It is really, you have to be really good to do that, and you really need to know everything. We're not even there now when you can actually use it. We have now, so far, only created these teeth fitting nicely together. Now you have to weld them together. They're still just forged to the shape and fitting nicely if everything went well.
Okay, so but they're not permanently connected.
They're not connected anyway. They're just sitting there.
Oh, I see.
That's
okay.
all. That's all.
Okay.
And now comes the point when you have to weld them together, because that was the important thing on this research on this blade. That this part here, this part with these teeth, is clearly made separately. You can clearly see a constructional weld here, where the one part of these two materials ends towards the edge, and the second part here, and this was then welded in between the body and the edge of it. So this little thing here I've been talking about now lengthily was produced separately, which now shreds all this kind of theories about that these teeth and somehow were to improve the strength of the
structural integrity. So it's actually not a structural feature or anything.
No. There's no use.
Which means it's just ornamental.
It's just cool.
It's just cool.
But we do it because we can. It has of course, this weld here is very strong. It cannot come apart. But that doesn't help you if this part here comes apart.
Of course.
And so it's
so okay. So if
technically it's completely unnecessary.
Okay. So the idea that these teeth make for a stronger bond or so is kind of pointless when at the outer edges I have straight edges again that are connected in a traditional way anyway. Then,
if it doesn't come apart here, it doesn't help you much if it comes apart here. So,
exactly.
So why bother?
Exactly.
Also, this idea of that you actually need some kind of a larger surface, that comes from people who glue a lot, right?
Of course.
Possibly solder, because that makes sense, because the glue generally needs a more surface.
Exactly.
If we weld it, it becomes one piece anyway, and I have seen a lot of blades break for a different reason, mostly because I wanted to break them, and it breaks in all kind of places, but it never happens really, if it's good given now it's a proper weld, that this part here just comes off. I've never seen that. Okay. It might happen if you really brutally...
So there wasn't even a need to think about different seams of...
No, this part here comes loose, maybe, or sometimes, while you're working on the blade. When you forge the edge, that's why a lot of people don't forge edges. We talked about that. They just grind it off. It's safe, rather safe than sorry. And in the old days, they of course always forged it, this this here, when it's like all welded together,
Yeah.
it's one massive block, which is
So,
about
so
one.
shaping it you do by forging instead
Exactly.
of removing
Yep.
material, which is today definitely
Yeah.
and also the easier
Yeah.
process, the one with for which you need less expertise, I assume.
Yeah, well, yes.
Well, you can teach me taking off material in a day, probably, but how to anyway. But teaching me to well, in a in a much shorter period, you will be able to teach me how to take off material as opposed to shaping something by forging.
Absolutely.
So that's what I want to say.
Plus, we have machines.
Yes.
So
Plus
with
we
an
have
angle
machines,
grinder,
plus the raw material
doesn't cost anything.
That's it.
That also adds this whole shaping of it, adds always to a small deterioration in the pattern. It kind of changes a little bit all the time. You cannot really forge it really even. So even if you have totally straight lines here or here, it will always change a little bit. And you can see we got a little bit of a wave here because it turned out we need to stretch this a little bit more, which then kind of pressed it. And you can easily get a little bit of a bend in here because we had to weld this once more. It was not really perfect weld.
But if you know that you want to, the final shape will be achieved by just grinding and sanding, then you could make it absolutely straight.
Yeah, then it's straight. Or, well, yeah, it's still hammered, but much straighter.
Yes, but much straighter than this.
Yeah. So, well, now we are. Where are we now? Oh, we have now welded this piece here, which is also something you need a lot of care because you really need to hammer it really deep.
And when we talk about welding, that means heating it up.
Fire welding, yeah. So 1200 degrees, and then you hammer it.
And then you hammer it, and then
then it becomes one piece.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. As a flux, then you use sand. Some use borax, but then it's old-fashioned kind of.
So how is the light line? The seam is lighter than the adjoining parts. How is this created?
Good question. This just turned out that way, and I don't really know why. I have some ideas about it, and one is that the surface of that. If you talk about this material here, this part, this is lines which we can't see now due to a bad polish, and this thing been lying around a very long time on Viking markets. But this part here is like the soft iron, and this shiny line that you see here is part of the soft iron part.
Oh, okay.
Without any really visible lines except the slag lines. It's part of that, and due to this hammering in there, you compress the material a lot.
So it's much denser than.
It's denser. You press some of the slags out and so on, and that changes the structure of it. But on the surface, a lot more than inside. You can see it often that the surface is worked generally much more than the inside, and also it has a certain amount of cold hammering because that's the surface that really cools first in contact with the other side, and the cold hammering changed the material too. So I think simply the surface here got kind of specially refined through this process, and it created this silver line here that we really wanted to make with this phosphorus iron, which we didn't have, and we had only 1 week. So
because with phosphorus iron you get that.
You get a silver line all the time.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, you get it. So we got that
in the
one.
seams.
Yes, in the
at the edges.
Yeah, especially in the seams. Sometimes it can be the hole. It depends. It's not such a precise thing.
But anyway, you achieved that line.
We got it accidentally.
Mechanically, in a sense.
More or less, we changed the steel a bit there, or the iron, and it turned then later out. It was not so much visible in the beginning. It came out later. This have been repolished now, must be 100 times, because after each season or after other two shows, when it's been fingered by everybody, you have to polish it a bit, and that changes the pattern. And this just came like it is now, and it shows some of the structure of the iron. That's why it is so prominent. Part here. We wanted it and we failed. We didn't get it as we wanted, but it turned out later all right. Anyway, it kind of came out now. So it's cool. Yeah. Well. So let's say now we have now welded this bit here, and of course we made another one. Yeah. Then we made these middle parts here, which are also something I wouldn't do that way anymore. Of course, you see, it's pretty original. They very often didn't care much. Normally, you take great pain that it stops with a twist here, and then comes a straight line.
So then it becomes super irregular instead of this one expanding out.
This kind of goes a bit out like that one. So same as both sides, of course, because they are also this one. Oh, that's another interesting feature. There can be different constructions, and on the whole piece that you find on the find, you can only look at the surface. So you can see two pieces here. You turn it around, you can see two pieces here. It's sometimes hard to tell. It might also be four.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, because they may be sandwiched through this center line too.
Exactly. Yeah. In this case, we know they weren't. They were just massive pieces, which adds a bit to the trouble at some point. But well, anyway. Also, this one here is like. This one here is it's not regular twisted. Here's a tight twist, and here gets a bit like opening. But it's not really nice. They did it all the time, but on really good pieces.
Nice if symmetry is your god.
It should be like this. Well, it is, of course. It should be like that here. But this one was finally assembled, I think, at 2 o'clock in the night, after a crate of beer, and we already we made a lot of this material. We had quite some, but with other blades which failed, we kind of used it up, and there was the last bit, and it was not really enough to hold it. But we didn't want to go through the effort of making a whole new bar, and we wanted to finish it in the night now, which you should not do. So we just let it go like that, which of course bothered me now for 20 years.
Yes. Which I like, by the way, but never mind.
Whatever. Yeah. Okay. So
in German you say Symmetrie ist die Ästhetik des kleinen Mannes.
Anyway. Well. Speak for yourself, peasant.
Anyway, so I really like that regularity.
Okay. This is a minor thing. It doesn't matter at all.
So here we have this pattern welding that you also see a lot in fullers of blades, and
this is like basic bread and butter stuff for blacksmithing.
And then did you connect the toothed bars to that centerpiece first?
No, you do it all in one go.
Oh, okay. So you put all the various parts of the blade together, and then it's fire welded all.
Yep.
Okay.
All in one go, because such blades it's quite simple. They don't need to be so wide, so you can just quite comfortably heat the bar that you put together. First, you need to forge, of course, everything, so it has already a little bit of this.
The original the shape that you want to achieve.
Yeah. This is again a geometrical thing. On another type of spearheads, you can use more like compressed and square parts. If you have only steel edges and a bit of bar in the middle or something like that, and they can stretch it later. In this case, you can't do it, because if you would do that, then you would stretch this pattern too, and in the end it will become almost a straight line. You can see a little bit here. These are a little bit more shallow, a bit more stretched than these.
Out a bit.
Because here we had to kind of at some point you need to shape it a little bit, and also on the original you can see that they're getting a little bit shallower here, so they had the same problem, and it adds also to the appearance of it in my opinion, and we took great pains to actually make them meet here nicely, see, so everything meets right here and it goes out, and on original blades, on some good ones, it is also like that. They really made it nicely. On others it didn't seem to care much. Anyway, you have to pre-forge them all in the right dimensions. I'm not going into now how much you need for this and that. If you want to reforge that, you have to do a little bit of your own experimentation there, and then you weld it in one go together, or not in one go, but you make a whole big bar where all these parts are in place. They're all of the same thickness. So
there's of course no edge or anything.
No, you cannot take weld a narrower piece to a wider piece as well. So you have to calculate like a little bit how much do I need, so it in the end becomes this much. Because you can't.
So it would be narrower because the shape of the cross section of the edge is hammered out by forging. So it's not like you make a block and then you grind it off, but even the three-dimensional shape is achieved basically by forging.
Exactly, it's like plus minus. I mean, and then it will be like 2.5-3 millimeter thick still, but the main shaping is done by that. And you need to think how much material will you need and where will it go. That makes it in a way more complicated. On the other hand, it saves a lot of material. All the stuff that you normally would grind off, you don't need to grind off. Well, so the whole thing you put together and just hold it with the clamp I've been talking about, or just what we mostly use is just weld it a little bit with electro welder. Just You know, the part that is cut off in the end anyway, you can just weld it together so it stays together, and it's much easier handling. It has no. It makes the work a little bit easier, but
it has no effect.
Nothing. This part is cut off anyway in the end, and
so the result will be indistinguishable.
It's just quits the fooling around with the tongues. So and then you weld it all together, and then you pre-forge this thing here, more or less, like roughly in shape, no more than roughly, even not really thinned out as much, and not really to it say 5, 6, 10% off that shape, because you want to have it sturdy. And you want to have it like thick and not such a sensitive little. It's thicker. It's thicker and narrower, not really finished yet. Because once it is really finished and thin and everything, it's all quite sensitive. This whole thing, and we still have only made this part. Right. So this needs to be now finished more or less.
So we have the basic
that's
blade
the
of the spearhead.
That's the blade. Yeah.
Now comes the socket and the wings.
Yes, and the wings. Yes. First comes the socket, and there's.
Well, you would guess that this is the most laborious part here, and technically most challenging.
This one here is technically really challenging, and was really in that way the main part, but after you found out how to do it, it's actually not such a big deal anymore, and no problem at all. And the socket.
Now comes the socket.
The socket. Yep. We know exactly how the socket originally was made. It was made from one piece of iron, which was of a certain thickness. It was forged roughly. What is it now? Trapezoid.
Diamond shape. Diamond shape is like Raute. Oh, a trapezoid.
Let me see. The shape is like this.
Okay.
So you
like
eine Abwicklung.
Got it.
Kegelstumpfabwicklung, whatever that is in English. I don't know.
Learn German and you'll understand all the jargon.
However, if you take this socket here and you cut it open and you roll it out flat, this is about what you need to forge first and thick enough. Right?
Okay.
So and then
you have a flat piece that has this shape, so that it can be turned into this round.
Yeah. If you made a rectangular piece, it would be cylindrical.
Exactly.
But you don't want cylindrical.
No,
you want it
to taper to the top.
So, but it's not much. So, well, anyway. So, and you need to forge it as wide as the circumference, the outer circumference is, plus a little bit because it needs to overlap. To weld it, you don't weld it like this. Not possible. It overlaps a little bit, and then you weld it here
to join it together.
The seam is joined. Ideally, it's joined like really well. It does not always happen. You can see the seam here. Here's a little bit of an open weld.
It runs down to here?
Yep.
Okay.
This was not intentional. If everything goes well, then it goes all straight here. But we were still new in this thing of welding sockets. Now they're all completely boring straight. So through all this kind of twisting and hammering, and then it was a bit, re-welding it, it kind of just twisted itself in the forging process. Just happens. The original is not very straight either. It just goes randomly something there.
I see.
It does not matter at all.
Yeah.
And the seam was on the side.
Okay.
Yeah. You can see that clearly in the original. You can also see it in the cross section here. Right. So you forge this whole thing here. You weld it shut. You need to heat it to welding temperature. Then you have a core that fits exactly inside. Simply a conus that fits inside.
That's a steel core.
A steel core, yes, and that steel core you need to heat also quite some, about 600 degrees, and then you weld it in Gesenk.
Like a negative
something round. Something round. And
so it's like an anvil with in the cavity.
With but with a.
So it's sharp at the end?
No, it's just. Goodness.
Sagst du auf Deutsch?
Ich frage mich gerade, wie es auf Deutsch heißt.
Hat das einen konischen?
Ein Gesenk, und das ist einfach nur ein geradas Halbrund. Also ein Gesenk, was halbrund quer durchgeht. Also so, jetzt keine Schale, sondern ein halbes Loch.
Okay, so it's an anvil with a cavity, and it's a long cavity, and in cross section it ends with a semicircle.
Yes, a semicircle, and it's slightly bigger than our
Okay.
It's
Slightly
not
wider.
really a mold, it's more like when you hammer it, you don't want to have a flat anvil because then you just deform one side too much. It's more or less to kind of gently hold the whole thing together. So what you do is you get the tube, the socket, which is still just a tube. You get this to a welding temperature, especially where the seams is, but basically the whole thing. The core you preheat, because if you put a cold core in something really hot, it will quickly take the heat out, and then you can't weld it anymore, because the time window for the welding is really small, and also the temperature frame is really small, 1200 degrees roughly Celsius. In case there's Americans listening to that, 1200 is about the temperature. 1250 is already too hot, then the iron will burn really a lot.
Oh, okay.
And 50 less than 1150, it does not
So
weld
you have
anymore.
a really small margin regarding temperature.
Roughly 50 degrees, and we're talking about temperature that is about, it's already 1200. So putting it in there and going over to the anvil and putting it there is already enough to actually cool it down. That's why the core is preheated. Because if the core is preheated to 600 degrees, it doesn't lose much
When you
stability.
heat up things and you need and you have some critical temperatures, do you actually measure it, or because of course they wouldn't have any implements to measure it, they would just go by color and experience?
That's what we do.
Oh yeah, okay.
No one. Well, I think it's also very hard to measure it. For the first in this temperature range, it's hard to measure anyway, because many of these.
So you go by experience and color, and
I just
things
go
like
by the color and the way the sand melts on it.
Oh, I see.
It's basic.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, and you can be really precise with that. In more sensitive steels, this time window is even smaller. It's roughly like 20 to 30 degrees, and you can really see that. So it's no need for measuring it. You don't need to do it, and anyway, it would be very awkward to try and measure. And now.
Well, yeah, I agree, but I was just
however,
curious.
there's no need to measure it, and it takes a few years, but then you can judge the temperature quite well. And you take it out and put this core in, put it over there, and then just hammer it shut, more or less. It's a normal fire weld.
Okay.
And you need to do it 2 times, 3 times, depending on the length of the socket. Now, of course, I laugh about the problems I had back then, because this is actually a really simple socket to weld. It's very short and very thick. We talked about the Birka spears, which are
very slim, very thin.
Yeah, they have sockets about this long,
yeah.
and the socket is a little under 2 millimeters thick, and I think they have a diameter of about 18.
So do you
millimeters.
have for each shape of socket? Do you have to weld a particular core first?
Forge.
A forge. Sorry.
Yes, yeah.
You have to forge a core that fits in.
You can reuse them,
yes.
right? So
you can reuse them, but you have to make these.
You have to make them, and you have to reshape them
forging.
also, because they get deformed in the process.
I see.
So you need.
Let me just get you some shade.
You get a lot different. There's a good ball.
Willst du einen Schluck Wasser?
Ja, vielleicht wäre es nicht schlecht. Oder einen Kaffee haben wir hier noch. Einen Kaffee brauchen wir.
Kaffee, das ist Tee. Tee. Ich kann dir mal noch einen Kaffee machen, wenn
Nee,
du
ich nehme
möchtest.
einfach Tee, dann nehme ich einfach hier das Ding.
Oder so.